I was finishing a simple repair on the wind sensor when everything happened. It was a kind of task I do almost on autopilot after so many years working in isolated regions, tightening bolts with thick gloves, clearing ice buildup from electrical connectors, checking whether the antenna was still transmitting data correctly to the climate monitoring satellite. The wind sliced across my face like invisible blades, and the air carried that dense, oppressive silence that only exists in places where human presence is rare and nature reigns absolute. The sun, low and eternally trapped on the horizon at that time of year, painted everything in a pale, tired blue, almost ghostly. The entire landscape seemed suspended in a limbo between day and night, a perpetual twilight that distorted the sense of time. Nothing indicated that this day would be any different from the others, just another routine maintenance shift at a remote meteorological station, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest civilization. I was already used to the solitude. 5 years in this kind of work teaches you how to find comfort in silence, how to turn the absence of human voices into something almost soothing. The base was small, functional, built to withstand the most extreme conditions. Double-layer reinforced metal walls, a diesel heating system, satellite communication when atmospheric conditions allowed. It was everything I needed to survive there for weeks on end, collecting data, keeping equipment running, being the eyes and ears of science in one of the most inhospitable corners of the planet. That was when I noticed movement. It wasn't obvious. There was no sudden noise, no clear shadow cast against the snow, just a subtle alteration in the pattern of the landscape, as if something had shifted where, seconds earlier, everything had been perfectly still. It was a kind of perception you develop only after a long time in wild environments, when your senses sharpen to detect what shouldn't be there. I turned my head slowly, more out of instinct than conscious curiosity, and froze. There were eyes in the dark. They reflected the faint light from the base's external floodlight in an irregular way, appearing and disappearing as the creature moved among the shadows. They weren't approaching. They weren't retreating either. They simply stayed there at the exact boundary where artificial light dissolved into natural gloom, watching with intensity that made me swallow hard. My first impulse was to go straight back into the base. That region was known for large wild animals. Polar bears, occasionally Arctic wolves, creatures that saw humans as intruders in their territory. Staying exposed outside without necessity was stupidity that could cost you your life. The safety manuals were clear. At the slightest sign of wildlife, retreat immediately, lock all entrances, wait until the animal leaves. But something about that behavior made me hesitate. Predators don't stand still like that. They don't observe for so long without testing the territory, without evaluating whether the prey is worth the effort, without showing some kind of active interest. This was different. There was an almost deliberate quality to that observation, as if the animal wasn't hunting me, but trying to communicate something. I grabbed a radio clipped to my thermal jacket pocket and tried to contact the support base. Even though I knew it was unlikely anyone would answer, I was alone that week. The rotation team should have arrived 2 days earlier, but a severe weather front had delayed all flights and ground transport in the region. The radio responded only with static, producing that familiar white noise of impossible communication amid atmospheric interference. When my eyes finally adjusted better to the dimness and the contrast between light and shadow, I was able to recognize the animal more clearly. It was a bear, big, very big. My stomach clenched automatically. A primitive fear response in the presence of a predator that could tear me apart in seconds if it decided to attack. The distance between us was technically safe, maybe 30, 40 meters, but it wasn't comfortable. Not when dealing with an animal that can cover that distance at surprising speed when motivated. I knew the safety protocols by heart. Keep your distance. Don't make sudden movements. Don't show fear or aggression. Never run. Slowly, very slowly, I took a step backward toward the base door, without fully turning my body, keeping the animal in my field of view at all times. That was when she moved, not toward me as I feared. On the contrary, the creature turned her heavy, massive body and began to move away, walking with obvious difficulty across the uneven, compacted snow. The movement was strange, awkward, nothing like the lethal grace bears usually display in their natural habitat. I took another step back, relieved, my muscles relaxing slightly, ready to enter the base, close the reinforced steel door, and end that disturbing encounter. Just another story to tell when the team finally arrived. But after walking a few meters, she stopped. She turned her massive head over her shoulder and looked directly at me. It wasn't an aggressive look. There was no threat in those dark eyes. Nor was it mere curiosity. The kind animals sometimes show towards something unusual in their environment. There was something deeper there, a silent insistence, almost a plea. She remained completely still for a few seconds that seemed to stretch infinitely, then took a few more heavy steps, stopped again, and repeated the gesture. Looking back, focusing on me, waiting. That was the precise moment I felt the first real chill, not caused by the cutting Arctic wind. It was as if she was waiting for me. The idea was absurd, ridiculous. Even wild animals do not lead humans anywhere, do not display that kind of directed behavior, do not establish intentional communication with other species. Years of scientific knowledge, behavioral observation, understanding of nature, all of it told me this was impossible. And yet, there she was, looking at me with an intensity that defied all logic. I knew I shouldn't follow. Every fiber of my professional training, every memorized safety protocol, every cautionary tale about people who trusted wild animals too much and paid with their lives. Everything screamed at me to enter the base, shut the steel door, and forget that bizarre scene. But something was wrong, fundamentally wrong. The behavior didn't fit any pattern I had observed in years of working in remote environments. She wasn't hunting. The posture was all wrong for that. She wasn't defending territory. She would have confronted me directly if that were the case. She wasn't just passing through. The movement was far too deliberate, far too directed. I watched more closely as she took a few more steps. Her body seemed too heavy, her pace irregular and labored. Every few meters, she stopped to catch her breath, and I could see thick vapor bursting from her nostrils in short, uneven clouds, a breathing pattern that indicated extreme exertion. Something was very wrong with her. I took a deep breath, feeling the icy air burn my lungs, and weighed my options. The rational decision, the safe decision, the decision any sensible person would make, was to turn my back and forget it. I had no obligation to that animal. It wasn't my job to intervene in nature. The rules were clear: observe, document, but never interfere. But if I was right about what I was perceiving, if something was truly, seriously wrong, then turning away would also have a price I might not be able to pay later. Lying in bed alone, knowing I could have made a difference and chose not to. I zipped my thermal jacket up to my chin, adjusted my hat to better protect my ears from the cutting wind, quickly checked that my multi-tool knife and tactical flashlight were secured to my equipment belt, and made the stupidest or most important decision of my life. I started following her. I kept a prudent distance, about 20 meters, far enough to give myself reaction time as she changed behavior, but close enough not to lose her in the monochrome landscape. Every step was calculated, every movement measured. I was aware that I was violating every protocol, aware that I was potentially putting my life at risk, aware that if something went wrong, no one would know where to find me until it was too late. She led me away from the base, toward a lower area of terrain where permanent ice mixed with rocks exposed by constant erosion, and snow accumulated in uneven layers from years of storms. The wind there was stronger, less obstructed by the terrain, slicing like knives through any gap in my thermal clothing. The ground was treacherous, covered by a crust of ice that had dangerous irregularities. Several times, I almost slipped, my arms instinctively spreading to maintain balance as my feet searched for solid footing. Each step was a negotiation between speed and safety. If I fell there, twisted an ankle, or broke a leg, it would be over. There was no rescue team, no medical support, only the relentless cold and the cruel distance between me and any form of help. She continued for perhaps 15, 20 minutes. Hard to measure time accurately when every second seems to drag. The sun continued its slow journey along the horizon, subtly changing the angle of the light, without ever truly setting, creating long, distorted shadows that danced across the snow. Then, suddenly, she stopped. She didn't slow gradually. She simply stopped, as if she had reached some destination invisible to me. I approached cautiously. every sense on high alert. And that was when I finally saw her true condition clearly enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Her body was wet, not just damp from snow or condensed breath, but genuinely soaked, as if she had spent a long time in icy water. Her fur, which should have been thick, insulating, uniform, was clumped in irregular patches against her skin, heavy with frozen moisture, with entire areas darkened from prolonged contact with water. Her front legs were visibly trembling, even from a distance. It wasn't a superficial shiver caused only by cold. It was something deeper, more structural, as if the muscles were on the verge of total collapse. Her breathing was far too rapid, much too fast for someone who had merely been walking. Each inhale and exhale visible as dense clouds of vapor in the frozen air. She tried to take one more step toward a nearby rock formation and collapsed. The impact of her massive body against the ice and compacted snow produced a dull, heavy, visceral sound that echoed to the oppressive silence like a gunshot. Small fragments of ice broke free from the ground on impact, and a cloud of powdery snow briefly rose before being scattered by the wind. My heart raced, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stopped exactly where I was, every muscle tense, unsure of what to do. An animal that size, down and potentially injured, was as dangerous, perhaps more dangerous, than an animal actively attacking. Injuries make wild animals unpredictable, strip away normal behavioral patterns, turn even peaceful herbivores into lethal threats. But she didn't try to get up immediately. She remained lying on her side, her enormous flank rising and falling irregularly, each breath seeming to require monumental effort. Her head rested on the ice, her eyes half closed, her tongue visible between her teeth. I took a cautious step toward her, then another, and another. She didn't react. I moved close enough to see details that distance had previously obscured, alert to any sign of aggression, any sudden shift in posture that would indicate imminent danger. That was when I saw her belly. It was swollen, not with the kind of swelling caused by accumulated fat or overeating, but with something much more specific: advanced pregnancy. She was pregnant, very pregnant, and something was terribly, horribly wrong. The water dripping from her fur suddenly made sense. She had been in water, probably trying to cross a partially frozen body of water, or perhaps she had fallen through thin ice. The extreme exhaustion made sense now, too. A female at that stage of pregnancy should not be traveling like that, let alone crossing difficult terrain, and exposing herself to risks of that magnitude. The birth, I knew from readings and basic field biology training, should not occur there, not in that extreme cold. Not without any kind of shelter, not with a mother in such a state of profound exhaustion. The cubs would need immediate warmth, protection from the wind, a mother capable of caring for them in the critical moments after birth. None of that was available. Before I could fully process the situation, before I could form any kind of plan, her body contracted violently. It was a full convulsion, starting in the rear and rippling through her massive frame. A low, deep moan escaped her throat, a sound that carried an almost human quality in how it expressed pure, inescapable pain. She tried to shift, her powerful hind legs scraping against the ice in an instinctive attempt to find a better position, muscles contracting beneath wet, matted fur. And then I understood with sudden and terrifying clarity. The labor had begun, there, in that impossible place, at that impossible moment. I was alone, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest help, without medical or veterinary equipment, without proper training for this, without any form of support or guidance. The radio remained silent, heavy clouds blocking any possibility of satellite communication. The wind was gradually increasing, carrying with it the promise of another storm. The daylight, as it existed in that perpetual twilight, was beginning to subtly change, growing dimmer, bluer, more ghost-like. There was no time to seek help. Even if there had been anyone to help, there was no time to plan, to think, to consult manuals. There was only that moment, that suffering animal, and an impossible decision. I moved even closer, now just a few meters from her, close enough to clearly see what was happening. My hands trembled inside the thick gloves, not just from the penetrating cold, but from the absolute weight of what I was about to attempt. With each contraction, her body arched in a way that was painful even to watch. The effort was monumental, visible in every tense muscle, every labored breath. She was too weak, had lost too much energy on the journey that brought her there. Then I saw something emerge, dark against the white snow. Wet, far too small compared to the mother's massive body. The first cub was being born, or desperately trying to be born. But something was fundamentally wrong. It wasn't moving the way it should, wasn't sliding naturally outward the way educational videos and documentaries show. The process was tortuously slow, interrupted by the mother's long pauses, during which she barely seemed able to gather enough strength to continue between contractions. I should not interfere. Every wildlife manual says that. Every field training reinforces that human intervention in natural processes, especially births, almost always ends badly. It increases the animal stress, introduces infection risks, can cause a mother to reject a cub, can result in deadly defensive attacks. But if I did absolutely nothing, if I stayed there merely observing with scientific detachment, that cub would die before my eyes, and the mother, exhausted beyond any reserve, would likely die too, along with any other cub still inside her. The rules were written for normal situations. This was not normal. I knelt slowly in the snow, ignoring the cold that immediately began to burn my knees, even through multiple layers of thermal clothing. Every movement was deliberate, slow enough not to further frighten the already stressed animal. I used a tactical flashlight clipped to my belt to illuminate the situation better, trying to understand exactly what I was seeing. The cub was stuck, not completely inside, not completely out, simply frozen in an impossible position. I waited. Maybe the next contraction would resolve it naturally. Maybe nature could still take its course without my clumsy, potentially fatal interference. The contraction came. The mother's muscles tightened with visible force. Nothing changed. The cub remained exactly where it was. I took a deep breath, the icy air burning my throat, and made the decision. I removed one of my thick gloves, exposing my hand to the brutally painful cold. I needed tactile sensitivity, needed to feel what I was doing. With gloves on, I could cause irreversible damage without even realizing it. When her body contracted again, I used a natural movement and gently grasped the small, partially exposed body. It was warm against my frozen hand, but it didn't move, showed no sign of life on its own. I pulled with extreme care, following the rhythm of the contraction, not forcing anything, simply assisting what the mother's body was already trying to do on its own. She growled. It was a deep, guttural, threatening sound, the kind predators make a second before attacking. Every hair on my body stood on end instantly. My heart raced so fast that for a moment I thought I might pass out. I froze completely, still holding the partially born cub, expecting to feel massive teeth closing on my arm or shoulder, expecting the impact of claws that could tear me apart. But she didn't attack. She didn't turn to bite me. She just growled and then, astonishingly, relaxed slightly, allowing me to continue. It was as if she understood, on some deep instinctive level, that I was trying to help, not harm. The minutes that followed were the longest and most intense of my life. My hands, the exposed one and the one still protected, ached with an intensity beyond description. The cold was causing damage. I knew that, but I couldn't stop. Every second stretched into an elastic eternity. I worked in sync with the mother's contractions, helping when she had strength, pausing when she needed to catch her breath. My fingers were going numb, losing sensitivity, but I couldn't stop, couldn't give up when we were so close. Until finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cub slipped completely free and fell into my frozen hands. It was small, much smaller than I expected. A miniature bear soaked, completely covered in a translucent, slick membrane, eyes still closed, body far too limp, completely motionless. It wasn't breathing. The tiny chest didn't move. No sound came from that little mouth. My stomach dropped as if I'd been punched. I quickly cleared its nose and mouth with the sleeve of my jacket, removing anything that might be blocking its airway. I rubbed the little body with the glove still on my other hand, trying to stimulate a reaction, generate heat through friction, awaken whatever survival instinct might still exist. Nothing happened. The chest remained still. No movement. No sign of life. I looked at the mother, searching for guidance, some sign of what to do, but she lay there with her eyes half closed, so utterly exhausted she could barely lift her massive head. She made no move toward the cub, showed no maternal interest. I knew exactly what that meant. I'd read about it, seen documentaries, heard stories from field biologists. Mothers that are too exhausted sometimes simply can't invest energy in cubs that appear weak or dead. It's a cruel choice of nature, preserving energy for those with the greatest chance of survival. If the cub wasn't stimulated immediately, if it didn't start breathing in the next few seconds, it would die. And all the effort, all the risk, all the protocol violations would have been for nothing. I began rubbing the tiny body more vigorously, using both hands now, completely ignoring the cold that was destroying my fingers. I massaged the small chest with 2 fingers, tried to mimic cardiac compressions, blew warm air close to its muzzle, tried to warm the body against my own chest. The seconds passed with agonizing slowness. Nothing changed. The little body remained limp, cold, unresponsive. The cold was winning. I was losing. Then I felt the mother's body contract again, a convulsion even more violent than the previous ones. Another deep groan echoed through the silence. My blood ran cold. There was another cub. The second was born faster, almost sliding out with sudden force, driven by a final, desperate effort from a mother. It fell directly onto the compacted snow, rolling slightly before coming to rest. Completely motionless. No sign of life. Now there were two small, apparently lifeless bodies. Desperation took hold of me in a way I had never experienced before. My hands trembled uncontrollably. My heart raced. My breathing turned short and irregular. I couldn't help 2 at once. Not like that. Not with such limited resources, with hands so damaged by the cold, with knowledge so inadequate. I felt a knot form in my throat, the physical sensation of absolute failure. I had risked everything, my safety, my survival, my job, potentially my life, and still it wouldn't be enough, not knowing what else to do, with no plan at all, just following some deep instinct. I carefully placed both cubs close to the mother's muzzle, where she could see them, smell them, reach them if she chose to. That was when something fundamental changed. She opened her eyes. Not fully. The lids were still too heavy for that, but enough to focus on the 2 small bodies in front of her. Something shifted in her posture, in the quality of her breathing, in the energy she radiated. She sniffed the first cub, deeply, then the second. Her massive head moved with difficulty, but it moved, examining each of them with intense attention. Then her body, moments earlier on the absolute brink of total collapse, summoned strength I didn't believe still existed. She began to lick them, slowly at first, with long but heavy strokes of her rough tongue, from head to tail of each cub, then faster, more insistently, with greater vigor. Her tongue massaged the small bodies without stopping, instinctive movements programmed by millions of years of evolution, as if she refused to accept the possibility of loss. I remained completely still, barely daring to breathe, afraid that any sound or movement from me might shatter that fragile moment. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing happened. The cubs remained motionless under their mother's attention. The hope that had begun to grow in my chest started to wither again when, suddenly, I saw the slightest movement, almost imperceptible. So small that for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. A faint tremor in one of the cubs' chests. She noticed before I did. With senses sharper, more attuned, she focused all her attention on that specific cub, licking with even more vigor, more determination, with an absolute refusal to accept death. And then it happened. A squeak, weak, short, almost inaudible beneath the sound of the wind. But it was sound. It was life. The small chest rose, clearly unmistakably, and fell, then rose again. Then came a second squeak, slightly stronger than the first, more insistent. My legs nearly gave out beneath my own weight. Tears, freezing almost instantly against my skin, began to run down my face. They weren't from sadness or despair, but from something far more complex. Relief, awe, profound gratitude for the absurd resilience of life. But the fight was far from over. The other cub took longer, much longer. The mother didn't stop, for even a second. She alternated between the two, licking, warming, stimulating, as if every movement of her tongue were a silent promise that she wouldn't give up no matter how long it took. Minutes that felt like hours passed. The wind intensified. The temperature dropped even further. I was beginning to lose hope again when, against all logic and probability, the second cub also reacted. Weak, irregular, awkward, but alive. Undeniably, miraculously alive. I didn't openly cry at that moment. The cold had frozen my tears, numbed my face too much for expression. I simply sat there in the snow, feeling a monumental weight lift from my chest, replaced by something that would take days to fully process. But I knew, even in that moment of relief, that the real battle was only just beginning. The mother couldn't get up, even with the cubs now moving weakly, instinctively trying to nurse. She remained lying down, unable to gather enough strength to stand. She was severely dehydrated, completely exhausted, probably starving. The cubs tried to find milk, but she didn't have the energy to help them properly. If nothing were done, if I simply stood up and went back to the base, all three would die there that night. All the effort, all the risk, all the miracle of birth would be wasted. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew exactly what it would cost. At the meteorological station, I had supplies carefully counted and rationed, limited fuel for heating and power generation, food calculated to last exactly until the next rotation team arrived, drinking water obtained by slowly melting ice, a process that consumed precious fuel. Every decision about resource use was meticulously calculated to ensure my own survival until help came. Using those resources for anything else meant putting my own life at real risk. But when I looked at that exhausted mother trying to protect her newborn cubs with her own body, barely able to move, the choice didn't feel like a choice at all. I stood up with difficulty. My own legs were numb from the cold and from kneeling so long. I quickly checked that all three were stable enough for me to be gone for a few minutes. The cubs were nestled against the mother's belly, and she kept them as close as she could. Then I started running back to the base, or something close to running, more of an uneven trot across the treacherous terrain. The wind cut even harder now, carrying tiny ice crystals that stung any exposed skin like needles. The distance that had seemed short when I followed the bear now felt endless. Every step was a fight against uneven ground, against the fatigue beginning to weigh on my own muscles, against the cold demanding its price. I finally reached the base. I entered through the emergency door, the relative warmth inside making my skin burn from the sudden temperature change. There was no time to warm up properly. Every second mattered. I grabbed the portable heater, a battery-powered device designed for emergencies, which I'd been saving in case the main system failed. I grabbed thermal bottles and filled them with water I had heated for my own consumption. I took part of my ration food, jerky, high-energy bars, anything with protein and fat. If I used all of that and the rotation team was delayed longer than expected, I might not survive. But in that moment, looking at the supplies in my hands, that cold mathematical equation of survival felt irrelevant compared to the memory of those two tiny cubs struggling to breathe. I ran back, carrying more weight than was comfortable, slipping occasionally, but always managing to regain my balance. The sun, eternally stuck on the horizon, began to shift position, marking the passage of hours I couldn't precisely measure. When I returned, they were still there, the mother lying down, the cubs pressed against her. But the scene had subtly changed. The mother looked even weaker, her breathing more labored. One of the cubs was squeaking continuously, a sharp sound of hunger and discomfort. I set up the portable heater at a safe distance, creating a small bubble of relatively milder warmth. I opened one of the thermal bottles and, with extreme care, offered water to the mother. She lifted her head with difficulty, wary at first, but thirst overcame caution. She drank, not much. Her stomach probably couldn't handle large amounts at once, but she drank. I offered food, placing pieces close enough for her to reach without needing to move much. She sniffed, hesitated, then ate slowly. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was something. It was a chance. I spent the entire night there, sitting on the compacted snow, with the wind howling around us, absurdly bright stars in the dark sky above. Awake, alert, monitoring every movement, every sound, every breath. I offered water several times, small portions of food, adjusted the heater as the batteries began to weaken, watched the cubs try to nurse, squeaking when they couldn't find the right position, finally succeeding in calming down. Fear never fully left me. Fear that the mother would die. Fear that the cubs wouldn't survive the night. Fear that I had made a terrible mistake by interfering. Fear of what would happen to me if I'd used too many resources and the rotation team didn't arrive in time. But above the fear, there was something else. A strange, profound connection with those three beings fighting for survival in the frozen vastness. A visceral understanding that sometimes rules need to be broken, that protocols exist to guide us, not enslave us, that there are moments when the only ethical choice is the one that defies all professional logic. Only when the first subtle changes in light, the sun rising slightly on the horizon after its brief, strange night, began to appear did I discover the true reason behind it all. While waiting, I carefully explored the surrounding area, try to understand why a female so close to giving birth would be in that specific place, so far from known denning areas. That was when I found it. The area where that female should have sheltered, where generations of her species had probably sheltered for centuries, simply no longer existed. A recent human intervention, some construction or mining project I didn't know about, had completely altered the terrain. Rocks that formed natural shelters had been removed or destroyed. Traditional access routes had been blocked. The only safe place, the only refuge evolution had selected as ideal for births, had been destroyed by a human presence that wasn't even aware of the impact it was causing. She wasn't there by chance. She wasn't wandering lost or confused. She was there because she literally had nowhere else to go. Her mental geography, her instinctive map of safe places, pointed to something that no longer existed. And then, in the absence of any other option, her instinct guided her to the only other potential source of help she knew, the only other large, capable animal in the region. Humans. Me. It was absurd, improbable. It contradicted everything I knew about animal behavior. And yet, it perfectly explained everything that had happened. The rescue team finally arrived 12 hours later, brought in by a temporary window of milder weather. I reached them through the radio, which finally began to work when the clouds cleared. When they arrived and saw the situation, a meteorological station technician sitting in the snow beside a polar bear and two cubs, surrounded by survival equipment and empty thermal bottles. The expressions on their faces were absolute shock. The hours that followed were a blur of professional activity. Wildlife veterinarians were called in. The situation was assessed with proper equipment. Difficult decisions were made. There was no perfectly happy ending, but there was the best possible option given the circumstances. The mother and cubs were carefully transported, a complex and risky operation, to a wildlife rehabilitation facility where they would receive proper care, where the cubs could grow strong enough to eventually, perhaps, be reintroduced into safer areas. I watched from a distance, kept back by protocols that finally made sense again. No dramatic goodbyes, no cinematic final looks, just professionals doing their jobs, moving sedated bodies with efficient competence. And footprints in the snow, hundreds of them, marking the path she had taken to find me, gradually disappearing as a constant wind redistributed the snow, erasing evidence, turning it all slowly into just another story that maybe no one would fully believe. In the days that followed, I went through multiple review meetings. My protocol violations were documented. The decisions I made were questioned. The use of resources was calculated and recorded. Some called me a hero, others an irresponsible idiot. The truth, as always, was probably somewhere in between. But since that day, I have never again seen a simple decision as merely a technical choice between option A and option B. I have never again blindly trusted protocols without considering the specific context. I have never again assumed that rules, however well-intentioned, capture the totality of human moral experience. Some choices change lives. Yours. Others, sometimes in ways we only understand much later. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most rational thing we can do is listen to that irrational voice that insists it's worth risking everything for something greater than our own survival, even when no one is watching. especially when no one is watching.